Hello, my name is Imraan. Recently, I've been reviewing and sharing thoughts about books I've read to mostly improve my own understanding, and this week I've listened and read The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Now, Sun Tzu is traditionally regarded as a Chinese military strategist and general in the East Zhuang era, and original author of The Art of War, published well over 110 years ago. And since then, there's been many versions of this original 13 chapter text, published, each of course with its own translation and commentary. If you would prefer to skip this commentary, you can either listen to the audiobook, which is just over an hour long, or even less if you're willing to listen to speed multiples. And if not, you could just skip to the back of the book and read the plain text translation, which I recommend doing. Now, not to say that the commentary in my copy wasn't very good or anything. If anything, I felt it was overly elaborate and sometimes quite insecure, often very defensive in its reasoning and justification. The introduction speaks a lot to China's wars and military experience. Lost in the midst of time, having built great walls and maintained huge armies spanning centuries. However, this does make for a very slow start, and before you nod off, it is perhaps worth skipping to the start with the first chapter. I do feel that there is more to this, but definitely found it very waffly and tiring to get through. Now, it comes to no surprise that a lot of the tactics and ideas aren't really practical for today. But that said, there are some very useful game theory elements and lessons of human understanding and behavior, which I found very interesting to read and learn from, let's say. Now, victory is perhaps what this book is about. More importantly, understanding what victory actually is and isn't. Victory is not presented as destruction, spectacle, nor drawn out struggle, but as the most effective and disciplined path to a clear win. It makes it clear that the object of war is victory, not lengthy campaigns, with true victory measured in control and restraint, not cruelty. Now, winning is not about ruin, but about securing the outcome with as little waste as possible. There's a strong emphasis on timing and efficiency, and the power of combining the collective energy of your army. Now, what stood out the most was this idea of fighting first and then finding victory. In a world that is fixated on reward, this book seems to argue victory comes from preparation and discipline and correct action long before it's ever recognized. Now, moving on to learnings, one of the most advantages is this idea of readiness. And there's a line that I'd like to read, and it's, "Whoever is first in the field and waits the coming enemy will be fresh for the fight. Whoever is second in the field and has to hasten to battle will arrive exhausted." Now, there's a lot to this because it really gives way to the idea of being early is not just polite or efficient, but strategic. I loved this because imagine you arrive at work late. You begin rushed, unsettled, and already on the back foot. Where if you arrive early, you have time to settle in, grab a coffee, and plan your day before starting. The sense of readiness also connects to self-awareness. The line about soldier spirit being keenest in the morning, fading by noon, and then bent on returning to camp by evening feels somewhat relatable, and highlighting the importance that studying our own mood and energy rhythms, there is this wisdom in understanding where you're strongest and weakest in a day, and equally recognizing this in other people, hopefully improving the way you communicate with them. There is also this angle that so much can be understood by simply paying attention. Well, some examples here were the soldiers leaning against their weapons was an angle that they were tired. If it meant fetching water, drank first before collecting for the army, it meant the army was thirsty. It built to this idea that can tell a lot about the condition of an army by the behavior of a single man, whether it is people, competition, or just everyday life. Careful observation can tell far more than you might originally believe. And I think there is some truth to that. There's also this fascinating thread around timing and human instinct. Sun Tzu really warned against attacking an army returning home. This is interesting because it recognizes that people heading towards comfort or safety or anything that they really desire will be willing to fight with unusual force, or much more than in any case. And it's a sharp observation about how fiercely people will fight to protect or achieve something when it feels just within reach. I think it's a still stands today. The way I like to think of it, if you in a queue and you very close to the till and someone cuts in front of you, are much more likely to speak up than if you were at the back of the queue where you just maybe let that person go. So there was a sharp observation, let's say. And another memorable aspect was on the subject of tactics. There's this snake called the Shuaijan snake, which is really an embodiment of coordinated strength. The idea being, if you strike the snake at its head, it will attack with its tail. If you strike at its tail, it'll attack with its head. And if you go for the middle, you'll be attacked by both ends, leaving the attacker consistently outmaneuvered. It makes for a brilliant metaphor. And yeah, that's towards the end of the book, which is great. Speaking of which, it is definitely a book I would recommend, especially in audio form. It's a quick half an hour listen to if you listen to it in 1.5 times speed, which is kind of fine because the narrator I found is quite nice on Audible. If I had to point to chapters with the most real world context that if you were just skimming through and you'd like to read, it would be chapter 5, chapter 7, and chapter 9, which is about energy and maneuvering, which was very interesting. I love to leave you with perhaps one of my favorite lines, and certainly the coolest line in the book. Let your plans be dark and impenetrable as night, and when you move, fall like a thunderbolt. So much on the topic of reviewing books. Take care. See you in the next one.